Welcome to On the Markets, your Thursday morning pulse check on the global economy and the stories that move the markets. I'm Michael, Emily's off for this one, and today we're asking a big question. Are interest rates around the world still rising or finally relaxing? After 2 years of aggressive tightening, inflation battles, and recession worries, central banks everywhere are at a crossroads. Some are holding steady, some are easing, and others are still pressing the brakes hard. Let's break it all down. Where rates stand now, what's driving the direction, and what it means for businesses, investors, and economies like ours. Let's start with the numbers. Around the world, interest rates tell a story of divergence. In the United States, the Federal Reserve has kept rates elevated, signaling patience before any cuts. Inflation has cooled from its peak, but policymakers remain cautious. Across the Eurozone, the European Central Bank has taken a softer stance, with rates around 2% and early discussions of gradual easing. Meanwhile, Japan continues to stand out as the outlier. After years of ultra-low or even negative rates, it's now testing modest hikes to counter inflation and yen weakness. And then there's the emerging market picture. Brazil still sits high around 15%, maintaining tight policy to defend the currency and contain inflation. Turkey, an eye-watering 40%, reflecting persistent price pressures and policy recalibration. In Africa, countries like Ghana and Nigeria continue to juggle high inflation and debt costs, leaving little room for rate cuts. So globally, we're not seeing a clear-cut turn. Rates are plateauing in some economies but still climbing in others. So what's the direction of travel? The short answer, it depends on your postcode. In developed markets, we're slowly shifting from an era of how high will rates go to how long will they stay this high. Inflation is easing, growth is wobbling, and central banks are talking about timing, not toughness. But in emerging markets, it's a different story. High rates remain a defensive shield against currency depreciation, capital flight, and imported inflation. What's driving this divergence? Inflation paths. While inflation has cooled in the US and Europe, it remains sticky elsewhere. Growth concerns. Slower global demand is making central banks wary of over-tightening. Debt burdens. Governments with large debt loads face pressure to lower borrowing costs, but risk undermining confidence if they move too soon. Currency risk. Strong dollar, weaker local currencies, that's keeping some central banks on edge. So while the global headline might read, interest rates easing, the fine print says, not everywhere and not yet. Let's zoom in region by region. North America. The Fed's focus remains on inflation and labor data. Markets are betting on rate cuts in 2025, but the Fed is playing it cool. No rush to declare victory. Europe. The ECB has started nudging rates down slightly as inflation moderates. However, policymakers remain cautious about reigniting price spikes. Asia. China's central bank is doing the opposite, cutting key rates to stimulate growth amid a property sector slowdown. Japan, meanwhile, is cautiously stepping away from negative territory after more than a decade. Latin America, Brazil, and Chile were among the first to raise rates and now among the first to trim them, though very slowly. Africa. Central banks across the continent are walking a tightrope. Inflation remains high, currencies under pressure, and external borrowing expensive. Many are holding rates steady for stability. Now, why should businesses and investors care about all this? Because interest rates touch everything. Borrowing costs. High rates make it more expensive for companies to finance projects or for households to take loans. Investment flows. Capital chases yield. High-rate economies attract investors, while low-rate ones may see outflows. Currencies and inflation. Shifts in rates can strengthen or weaken currencies, ripple through imports, and alter inflation expectations. Stock and bond markets. Rates influence valuations, debt servicing, and risk appetite. For emerging market economies, including here in Africa, global rate movements matter even more. When US or European rates rise, capital tends to flow outward, leaving developing economies facing higher borrowing costs and weaker currencies. As we move toward the end of the year, here's what to keep an eye on. upcoming central bank meetings from the Fed, ECB, and Bank of England. Inflation data. If it keeps cooling, expect rate cuts to follow. Global growth trends. Slowdowns could accelerate policy easing. And of course, currency stability, particularly in emerging markets heavily exposed to dollar movements. The theme for the months ahead? Caution, not celebration. Policymakers want to declare victory over inflation, but they're not ready to risk a comeback. So rising or relaxing? The truth is the world is doing a bit of both. The easy days of ultra-low rates are gone, but the peak of the tightening cycle might finally be behind us. That's it for this week's episode of On the Markets. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, like the show and share it with someone who's watching the markets closely. I'm Michael, and I'll see you next Thursday right here where markets meet meaning.